A millionaire heiress, a midnight murder, and a mansion dripping with secrets. In 1977, one of Minnesota's wealthiest women was found smothered in her bed inside the majestic Glensheen Mansion, while her night nurse was discovered beaten to death with a candlestick on the grand staircase. The prime suspects? The victim's own adopted daughter and her husband, a pair whose greed may have led to one of the most shocking crimes in Minnesota history. But here's what makes this case truly chilling. Despite overwhelming evidence, no one would ever be convicted of the murders. This is no ordinary true crime story. This is a tale of immense wealth, family betrayal, and a justice system that seemed to bend for the privileged. As one detective would later say, money can't buy happiness, but in this case, it might have bought freedom. Welcome to the dark history of Glensheen Mansion, where opulence and tragedy collide in a tale that continues to haunt Duluth more than 4 decades later. Before we dive into the murders, let's appreciate what Glensheen truly is. One of America's most spectacular Gilded Age mansions, built between 1905 and 1908 at a cost of $854,000. That's over $25 million in today's money. This 39-room Jacobean Revival masterpiece sits on 7.6 acres of pristine Lake Superior shoreline. Chester Congdon, a lawyer who made his fortune in iron ore mining during Minnesota's mining boom, spared no expense. The mansion features hand-carved woodwork, silk wall coverings imported from France, and a collection of rare art that would make museum curators envious. The architectural firm of Clarence H. Johnston Sr., one of Minnesota's most prominent architects, designed this 27,000 square foot masterpiece. The craftsmanship is evident in every detail, from the intricately carved wood paneling to the custom-designed furniture. Step inside and you're immediately transported to another era. The main floor features a stunning entry hall with a grand staircase, the same staircase that would later become a murder scene. The formal dining room could seat 40 guests comfortably under crystal chandeliers. The adjacent breakfast room offers breathtaking views of Lake Superior. The drawing room contains original furnishings that cost more than most people's entire homes in that era. Glensheen was the ultimate symbol of industrial wealth. 15 fireplaces, a bowling alley, a silver safe, and technologies that were revolutionary for their time. Electricity throughout, a security system, and even an early intercom system. The grounds are equally impressive. Formal gardens designed by the renowned landscape architecture firm Morell and Nichols stretch down to the lakeshore. A stone pier extends into Lake Superior, where the Congdons once docked their private yacht. A boathouse, carriage house, gardener's cottage, and greenhouse complete the estate. Essentially, a self-contained world of luxury on the shores of America's largest freshwater lake. To understand Glensheen is to understand its creator, Chester Adgate Congdon, a man whose life embodied the American dream. Born in 1853 to a modest Rochester, New York family, Chester worked his way through Syracuse University, became a lawyer, and moved west seeking opportunity. He settled in St. Paul, Minnesota, where he practiced law and served a term in the state legislature. But Chester's fortune truly began when he recognized the potential of Minnesota's Iron Range. With remarkable foresight, he invested heavily in what would become some of the world's richest iron deposits. By the early 1900s, he was a principal in the Oliver Mining Company and had amassed a fortune through strategic mining investments. Chester wasn't just wealthy, he was visionary. He helped develop the Mesabi Iron Range, which would provide much of the iron ore that built American industry in the 20th century. His business interests extended to copper mining in Arizona, banking, and real estate. Despite his wealth, contemporaries described Chester as unpretentious and committed to public service. He donated generously to educational institutions and civic causes. When he decided to build Glensheen, it wasn't merely to flaunt his wealth, though it certainly did that, but to create a family legacy, a testament to American ingenuity and progress. Chester married Clara Hesperia Bannister in 1881, and together they had 7 children who survived to adulthood: Walter, Edward, Marjorie, Helen, John, Elizabeth, and Robert. The Congdon children grew up in extraordinary privilege. They were educated at prestigious schools, traveled extensively, and were groomed to manage the family's vast businesses and charitable interests. When Chester died unexpectedly in 1916 at age 63, he left behind an estate worth approximately $40 million in today's money, carefully structured through trusts to provide for generations to come. Clara continued to live at Glensheen until her death in 1950, maintaining the mansion's grandeur and the family's social position in Duluth society. His youngest daughter, Elizabeth Congdon, never married but adopted 2 girls in her 40s, Marjorie in 1932 and Jennifer in 1935. Elizabeth remained in Glensheen while most of the other Congdon children moved away. Elizabeth was considered the family matriarch after Clara's death. She dedicated her life to philanthropy, serving on numerous boards, and establishing a reputation as one of Minnesota's most generous benefactors. By 1977, Elizabeth was 83 years old, legally blind, and confined to a wheelchair. She required round-the-clock nursing care, but was determined to stay in her beloved childhood home rather than move to a nursing facility. Despite her physical limitations, friends described her as sharp-minded, warm, and generous. She maintained the mansion meticulously, preserving it as a time capsule of Gilded Age splendor. While Elizabeth lived a life of quiet dignity, her adopted daughter Marjorie had a dramatically different story. Marjorie Congdon was adopted by Elizabeth in 1932 at age 2. The circumstances of her birth and early life remain somewhat mysterious, though we know her biological mother was unmarried, scandalous at the time, and that Elizabeth's adoption of Marjorie was considered an act of charity. From early childhood, those who knew the family say Marjorie displayed troubling behavior. Former Glensheen staff described incidents of cruelty to animals, manipulative behavior, and frequent tantrums. By 1977, Marjorie Congdon Caldwell was 45 years old and had been married twice. She had 7 children, 2 biological and 5 adopted, and a growing reputation for erratic behavior and financial troubles. Her first marriage to Dick Leroy ended in divorce after she adopted children without consulting him. Her second marriage to Frederick Caldwell, with whom she had her biological children, also ended in divorce amid allegations of Marjorie's excessive spending and emotional instability. Those who knew the family described Marjorie as manipulative and extravagant. Despite receiving generous allowances from trust funds set up by her mother, Marjorie was perpetually in debt. Court records would later reveal that she had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars from her own children's trust funds. Marjorie had a pattern of living beyond her means, buying expensive homes, clothing, and jewelry while neglecting to pay bills. Mental health professionals who later evaluated Marjorie suggested she displayed classic signs of antisocial personality disorder. She was charming and persuasive, but showed no remorse for harmful actions and appeared incapable of genuine emotional attachment. But it was Marjorie's third marriage that would set in motion a chain of tragic events. In 1976, Marjorie married Roger Caldwell, a twice-divorced West Fargo businessman, nearly 10 years her junior. The wedding was notable for Elizabeth's absence. She reportedly did not approve of the match. Roger wasn't exactly a catch. He had a failing helicopter business, mounting debts, and according to friends, a drinking problem. What he did have was charm, enough to convince Marjorie that he could turn his fortunes around. Friends described Roger as a dreamer, always with a new business scheme that was going to make him rich. He'd been a pilot, a businessman, and a salesman, but success always seemed just out of reach. Roger's former associates described him as someone who wanted the trappings of wealth without the work typically required to attain it. He drove luxury cars he couldn't afford and dressed expensively even as bill collectors called. The couple established a pattern. Roger would concoct business schemes, Marjorie would persuade her mother to invest, and the ventures would inevitably fail. By early 1977, the couple was deeply in debt. They owed over $60,000 to creditors, roughly $250,000 in today's dollars. Creditors were threatening legal action, and the couple's home was at risk of foreclosure. Their situation was desperate. And as Elizabeth's health declined, Marjorie stood to inherit roughly $8 million upon her mother's death, money that could solve all the Caldwell's problems. In the months before the murders, tensions between Elizabeth and Marjorie escalated significantly. Elizabeth had begun to refuse Marjorie's request for money, advised by family attorneys who were concerned about Marjorie's financial mismanagement. According to household staff, phone calls between mother and daughter often ended with Marjorie shouting. During one visit to Glensheen, Marjorie reportedly threatened her mother, saying, "You'll be sorry for this." Elizabeth confided in her nurse that she feared Marjorie's increasingly erratic behavior. She even consulted with her lawyers about changing her will, though she never actually did so. Meanwhile, Marjorie and Roger's creditors were closing in. Court records show they were facing at least 3 lawsuits for unpaid debts, and their home was scheduled for a sheriff's sale in July 1977. In a particularly telling incident, Marjorie contacted Elizabeth's attorney in May 1977, just weeks before the murders, to ask if she could borrow against her inheritance. She was told that was impossible. According to multiple witnesses, Marjorie then made a chilling statement. "I need that money, and I need it now. Mother's not going to live forever, you know." June 26, 1977 was a warm summer Sunday in Duluth. At Glensheen, it had been a quiet day. Elizabeth had attended church in the morning, then spent the afternoon in her garden with her nurse. Velma Piatila, one of Elizabeth's regular nurses, came on duty at 7 p.m. Staff would later describe the evening as entirely normal. Elizabeth had dinner, watched some television, and retired to her first-floor bedroom around 9 p.m. Around midnight, Velma checked on Elizabeth, who was sleeping peacefully, then returned to her room down the hall. What happened next remains one of Minnesota's most notorious crimes. Sometime in the early morning hours of June 27th, an intruder entered the mansion. Investigators believe the perpetrator knew the layout of the home and was familiar with the routines of its occupants. Velma apparently heard something and stepped out of her room, only to encounter the killer on the grand staircase. She was beaten savagely with a brass candlestick, suffering at least 13 blows to her head. The force was so great that pieces of the brass candlestick were later found embedded in her skull. The killer then proceeded to Elizabeth's room, where the elderly heiress was smothered with a pillow as she slept. Medical examiners would later determine she died of asphyxiation. The bodies weren't discovered until the next morning when Mildred Littman, the cook, arrived for work around 7 a.m. and made the gruesome discovery. She immediately called the police, who arrived within minutes. Strangely, despite the mansion containing valuable art and antiques, nothing appeared to be stolen. except for a single rare gold coin and possibly a ring belonging to Elizabeth. The apparent lack of robbery as a motive immediately raised questions. This didn't appear to be a random break-in gone wrong. This appeared targeted. Police immediately noticed oddities about the crime scene. There was no sign of forced entry, suggesting the killer either had a key or was let in. Security systems had not been triggered. The murder seemed both calculated and frenzied. Elizabeth's killing was methodical, while Velma's was brutally violent, suggesting the nurse's murder may have been unplanned. Blood evidence showed that the killer had walked through the mansion after the murders, including into rooms seemingly unrelated to the crime. This suggested someone familiar with the house who was looking for something specific. Duluth Police Detective Gary Waller led the investigation. He would later recall, "From day one, we had suspicions about the daughter and son-in-law. The financial motive was just too obvious to ignore." Within days, suspicion fell heavily on Marjorie and Roger Caldwell. Investigators discovered the couple had severe financial problems and that Roger had made a suspicious trip to Duluth around the time of the murders. Here's where things get interesting. Police traced Roger's movements in the days surrounding the murder. June 26th, Roger checked into the Duluth Holiday Inn under his own name. That same evening, a man matching Roger's description was seen near Glensheen early June 27th. Roger checked out before 7 a.m. Later, June 27th, Roger deposited $503 in cash into his bank account in Mound, Minnesota. The evidence began to mount. A hotel clerk in Duluth identified Roger as staying there the night of the murders. Fingerprints matching Roger's were found in the mansion on a water glass. A rare gold coin taken from the mansion was traced to Roger through a coin dealer. Airline records showed Roger had flown to Minneapolis the day before the murders. Witnesses placed a man matching Roger's description near Glensheen. That night, Roger's handwriting matched a signature in the Holiday Inn registry. Just 3 weeks after the murders, on July 19, 1977, Roger Caldwell was arrested at his home in LaPorte, Minnesota. Marjorie's reaction to her mother's murder struck many as odd. She showed little emotion at the funeral and was observed arguing with family members about inheritance matters during the reception. Perhaps most tellingly, when informed of Roger's arrest, rather than expressing shock or disbelief, she immediately contacted an attorney, not for Roger, but for herself. Roger Caldwell went on trial in August 1978 in Brainerd, Minnesota, after a change of venue due to extensive publicity in Duluth. The prosecution built a solid circumstantial case. They had Roger's fingerprints at the scene, witnesses placing him in Duluth, the stolen coin traced to him, and of course, the powerful financial motive. Defense attorney Doug Thompson argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that police had rushed to judgment by focusing exclusively on Roger. He suggested alternative suspects, including other Congdon family members who stood to inherit. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Roger maintained his innocence throughout, claiming he had been in Duluth on business but had nothing to do with the murders. After deliberating for almost 3 days, the jury found Roger Caldwell guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, it takes one of the strangest turns in American legal history. Marjorie was charged as an accomplice to the murders. Her trial, held in 1979, was nearly identical to Roger's. Same evidence, same witnesses, same prosecutors. But Marjorie had something Roger didn't: money for a dream team of defense attorneys. Her defense, led by renowned attorney Ron Meshbesher, was aggressive. They challenged every piece of evidence and portrayed Marjorie as a loving daughter being persecuted by authorities with tunnel vision. In a shocking outcome that stunned legal observers, Marjorie was acquitted of all charges. The jury reportedly found her too sophisticated and well-connected to have committed such crimes. This created an extraordinary legal paradox. Roger had been convicted of committing murders that his alleged accomplice was found not to have been involved in. In light of Marjorie's acquittal, Roger's attorneys filed appeals. In 1982, the Minnesota Supreme Court ordered a new trial for Roger based on new evidence, photos that might have helped his defense but weren't provided during his trial. Facing a new trial and the prospect of spending the rest of his life in prison, Roger accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty while maintaining his innocence, and was released after just over 5 years in prison. Legal experts still debate this case as an example of how wealth and connections can influence justice. While the less wealthy Roger went to prison, Marjorie walked free despite virtually identical evidence against them both. The saga of Marjorie Congdon Caldwell didn't end with her acquittal. In fact, it was just beginning, leading many to wonder if justice had truly been served in the Glensheen case. In 1981, while still facing murder charges, Marjorie was convicted of arson after burning down her own house in Mound, Minnesota, for insurance money. She served just 12 months in prison. After divorcing Roger, who later committed suicide in 1988, she married a wealthy Arizona man named Wally Hagen. Their marriage raised eyebrows from the start. Shortly after they wed, Wally's daughter from a previous marriage died mysteriously in a fire. Though investigated, Marjorie was never charged. In 1991, Wally died mysteriously of multiple drug toxicity, just days after changing his will to exclude Marjorie. Authorities investigated his death as suspicious, but couldn't gather enough evidence for charges. The pattern continued. Marjorie was later convicted of arson again in Arizona and of forgery related to Wally's estate. Authorities in multiple states began to see connections between Marjorie and a series of suspicious fires dating back decades. She was investigated for insurance fraud in several states and for allegedly attempting to burn down the home of her own son. In 1992, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison for attempted arson. When released from prison in 2004, Marjorie, then in her 70s, allegedly attempted to start yet another fire at the home of a woman who had befriended her. She was returned to prison for probation violations. In total, Marjorie has been connected to at least 7 suspicious fires across multiple states, the mysterious deaths of at least 3 people close to her, and numerous fraud schemes. As one prosecutor put it, if you follow the trail of Marjorie Congdon Caldwell, you follow a trail of fire, death, and destruction. Now in her 90s, Marjorie remains one of Minnesota's most notorious figures, a woman who many believe literally got away with murder and continued a decades-long criminal career. Roger Caldwell, meanwhile, never truly recovered from the ordeal. After his release from prison, he struggled with depression and alcoholism. In 1988, he was found dead of an apparent suicide, though some investigators still question the circumstances. Before his death, Roger reportedly told a friend, "No one will ever know the whole truth about what happened at Glensheen. The double murder at Glensheen had profound effects on the entire Congdon family. The surviving Congdon heirs were horrified not just by Elizabeth's murder, but by the suggestion that one of their own might be responsible. The family closed ranks. Marjorie was effectively disowned, though her trust fund payments continued as legally required. The other Congdon heirs devoted themselves to preserving Elizabeth's philanthropic legacy." in a move that ensured Glensheen would be preserved rather than sold or demolished. The family arranged to donate the mansion to the University of Minnesota Duluth in 1979. The gift stipulated that the mansion be maintained as a historic house museum, preserving the Congdon legacy for future generations. The Congdon Family Foundations continue to give millions annually to causes throughout Minnesota, focusing on education, arts, and social services, causes Elizabeth championed in life. Today, Glensheen Mansion is owned by the University of Minnesota and operates as a historic house museum, welcoming over 100,000 visitors annually. It's considered one of the most intact historic house museums in America, with an estimated 98% of items in the home being original to the Congdon family. For decades, tour guides were forbidden from discussing the murders. Management feared focusing on the tragedy would overshadow the mansion's architectural and historical significance. But in recent years, as public interest in true crime has surged, the policy has relaxed somewhat, though guides still won't volunteer information about the murders unless asked. Julie Gard, a former Glensheen tour guide, recalls, "People would always whisper about it after the tour. It became this open secret everyone knew about, but we couldn't discuss officially. Visitors often report strange experiences in the mansion, cold spots, unexplained noises, and even apparition sightings. Some believe the spirits of Elizabeth Congdon and Velma Piatila still linger, seeking the justice they never fully received." The bedroom where Elizabeth was murdered remains exactly as it was in 1977, down to the original furnishings. The only difference is the mattress. The original was taken as evidence and never returned. This grand staircase where Velma Piatila lost her life has been the site of numerous reported paranormal experiences. Night security guards have reported hearing footsteps on the stairs when no one is there, and several visitors have claimed to see a woman in a white uniform on the landing. The Glensheen murders have inspired numerous books, documentaries, and even a successful musical called Glensheen, produced by the History Theater in St. Paul. The case remains one of Minnesota's most notorious crimes and continues to fascinate the public nearly 5 decades later. It's been featured on national television programs including Unsolved Mysteries and City Confidential. Why does this case continue to captivate us? Perhaps because it has all the elements of a Shakespearean tragedy: wealth, power, betrayal, and family dysfunction, set against the backdrop of one of America's most beautiful mansions. This case forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about wealth, justice, and family, says Joe Kimball, author of Secrets of the Congdon Mansion. It raises the question, can money and privilege place someone above the law? The uneven justice received by Roger and Marjorie continues to trouble legal experts. Roger went to prison while Marjorie was acquitted on identical evidence, the primary difference being Marjorie could afford better attorneys. Despite the convictions and investigations, many questions about the Glensheen murders remain unanswered. If Roger Caldwell committed the murders, did he act alone or was Marjorie involved in planning them? Was Roger truly guilty or did he accept a plea deal simply to gain his freedom? Some investigators still believe there may have been a third person involved. Certain evidence at the crime scene, including some fingerprints, was never identified. The brutal nature of Velma Piatila's murder has led some to question whether it was committed by someone with a personal grudge rather than as part of a calculated inheritance scheme. Others point to rumors of other Congdon family tensions and wonder if the investigation focused too quickly on Roger and Marjorie, missing other potential suspects. We may never know the full truth. Many of those involved are now deceased, and physical evidence has been dispersed or destroyed over the decades. The Glensheen murders represent a perfect storm of wealth, greed, and family dysfunction. While the mansion stands as a testament to America's Gilded Age opulence, its dark history reminds us that wealth doesn't shield families from tragedy, and sometimes it attracts it. The case asks us uncomfortable questions about our justice system. How can two people charged with identical crimes based on identical evidence receive such dramatically different outcomes in court? The answer, troublingly, often comes down to money. Nearly 5 decades later, the case continues to fascinate the public and haunt the city of Duluth. Glensheen Mansion, where the walls hold secrets that money couldn't hide and justice couldn't fully reach. The Congdon family created a legacy of philanthropy and civic engagement that continues to benefit Minnesota today. It's a tragic irony that their name is now equally associated with one of the state's most notorious crimes. If you visit Glensheen, take a moment on that grand staircase to remember Velma Piatila and Elizabeth Congdon, two women whose lives were cut short in a place built to celebrate life's greatest luxuries. Their story serves as a reminder that behind the beauty and grandeur of historic mansions, real human stories, sometimes tragic ones, have unfolded. And sometimes the full truth remains just beyond our reach, hidden in the shadows of a mansion by the lake. Thanks for watching. If you love dark Minnesota history and want to hear about freebies and discounts across the state, hit like and subscribe. There's a lot more coming your way. Until next time, stay curious.